It really wasn't until I met my husband that he moved in with me and said, you are smiling, but you are suffering, and your life's kind of a mess. And we just started going to the Pasadena Farmers Market and cutting out processed foods, and in 30 days, my digestive issues were gone. Now, the most surprising part was, though, when my mental health over the course of the next year I became a different person.
So to kick things off, according to a recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, fancy stuff, upwards of 16% of the United States population, around 52 million citizens, now have a condition that's labeled as IBS. Can you start by sharing what IBS is?
Yes, IBS is kind of actually a wastebasket diagnosis. It can be characterized by things like digestive issues, diarrhea, constipation, gas, bloating, but it doesn't really describe what's happening. Usually what happens is they rule out other more serious pathology, and when you don't have that, it's kind of like, well, you've got irritable bowel syndrome. And I know it well because I suffered from it for years and years.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? Was it like, how long were you dealing with this?
Probably when I was about 10 is when it started. 10?
Oh
yeah, I would just have intermittent, and it wasn't like that serious or for me, but it was debilitating because it was unpredictable. So it wasn't like it never stopped, but I never knew when it was going to happen. I would all of a sudden look pregnant. I wouldn't want to go out. My life became unpredictable. And every doctor that I saw just said, oh yeah, well, this is a stress-related condition. So, go home, take some Beano, relax. And that's kind of the treatment I got. And when it wasn't remedied and we didn't really look for the root cause, kind of snowballed as I hit my teenage years. And we now know there's this gut-brain connection, and it became mental health stuff. And I really flew off the rails. But I do think it was that irritable bowel syndrome in the very beginning was kind of like a warning sign that I didn't know to take seriously, because we didn't know that food would matter really at that point in time, or the doctor didn't tell me that, at least.
Isn't that one of the craziest things?
It's insane now that you think about it. Why would food not have something to do with your stomach?
Especially in the field of gastroenterology, which is a field dedicated to studying and treating the organs responsible for digestion.
Yeah.
Right? For digestion, assimilation, elimination. Of course, food matters. And, we've had on award-winning gastroenterologists, one of the top guys in the field. And just to ask him, like, how much training did you get on food? He's like, basically nothing, And it's so crazy because even the organs themselves are made from the food that you eat.
I know, right? And yet I was never told anything to look for anything about what I'm eating or anything other than stress, reduce it, and take some Beano.
Yeah.
It was,
Well, you just gave, when you kicked off that answer, you said something really profound. I don't want people to miss this. It's really a blanket statement, right? It's a blanket diagnosis for, and the acronym that some people in this space, some clinicians use, IBS, is bullshit, right? Because it's just like, you're not actually identifying what the issue is. And it can become incredibly frustrating because, number one, we're not looking at the root cause. And because you can't figure it out, you just give it this categorization of IBS. You just leave it at that. And that's what you dealt with. And you mentioned that by not addressing that, we get to a place where this brain connection and stress and attributing, now they're probably giving you some antipsychotic medications or something like that.
Oh, you better believe, yes. I went on a lot of different psychiatric medications, Wellbutrin and Paxil and just kind of the litany, and they made me feel like a zombie. I know that they're valuable for some people, but for me, I just didn't have a good experience. I had the brain zaps, and I think I always said I had like one thought an hour. There was like a shell of me. And when that didn't work, I kind of thought, wow, I'm just broken. There's just something wrong with me. And so in order to not feel physical pain and emotional pain, I then just looked to substances, and my life got really out of control. And I actually got kicked out of my parents' house before I even graduated high school. And I think had I known to look at what I was eating, or that I had any sort of control around the way I was feeling, I think things would have unfolded very differently.
So how did you figure this out? How did you happen upon what the real solution is?
It took a long time, right? I continued. I've always been someone who kind of pulls myself up from my bootstraps, and so I still went to LA and I graduated college and I worked in a dance company. And it really wasn't until I met my husband that he moved in with me right down the street, actually, and said, you are smiling, but you are suffering, and your life's kind of a mess. And so he got on the internet. We went to one final doctor in LA, and they didn't have a solution. So he just saw some people in a little corner of the internet back in 2007 were seeing some luck with changing the way they ate. Right? It was, I think, Rob Wolf, maybe, and one other person. And we tried it. I was really reticent, but I said, oh, this sounds like it's not going to work, but I'll do it for you. And we just started going to the Pasadena Farmers Market and cutting out processed foods. And in 30 days, my digestive issues were gone. Now, the most surprising part was, though, when my mental health over the course of the next year I became a different person. And I was so inspired by that change. I had a great job working at Tracy Anderson. And I was like, I need to understand this other piece, because I've always been fit, but I was not well. And now that I am, I want to know how to give that away too.
That's so powerful, because that distinction between fitness and health, or fitness and wellness, they're two different things. Of course, there's many intersecting points, but you can be incredibly fit on the surface, but internally just be an absolute mess.
Yeah, that was my life. I remember walking down the aisle and I had to hold my arms up because I had these veins, because I was so fit, right?
So vascular.
I was so vascular. But then at night I was like crying and I would crash, and I didn't know, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. I felt like a fraud. I was a fraud to some extent. And so it was really neat when that little missing puzzle piece came together, and I thought, wow, this is something worth sharing.
This is important, truly. Again, upwards of 16% of the U.S. population has this condition, this diagnosis. Another big problem with it is that because it's a blanket statement, so many things fit under that. Yeah. And no two people's expression is the same at all. And this is not to negate the suffering that people are in, but oftentimes also because it doesn't seem like it's life-threatening, it's negated how life detracting it is. Like it can really be a constant weight that you're just carrying, and probably fear. You probably had a lot of fear around food.
Oh, absolutely. You just never really know what's going to happen and when you're going to feel bad, and it interferes with your social life. And I actually started passing out in high school. I don't know why, but I would go to a drive-in restaurant, or I'd crash my head into the lockers. And yeah, I just think it all started snowballing, and because it was left unaddressed when it was a pretty simple fix, I'd say. So, or at least I think it was, for me, cutting out foods isn't that hard. I know it can be harder for some people, but yeah, I just wish more people knew. Even
that, it's personality based, like what people, like how much change, but also pain is a great motivator, especially when you find some solution, something that's working, like it tends to really compel people.
It does. Just that sense of, I have a little bit of control, right? Yeah. Like my health is in my hands. I don't need to rely on people anymore, and I can make decisions that change my life, change the trajectory of my life. So it's absolutely powerful. I was managing every day, right? Smiling, suffering in silence, but getting it done. Yeah. But now life looks so much better when, I have the energy to do what I want. Life is more predictable, and I feel some sense of control. It's
like unlocking a superpower in a sense. Like it was always there. I just actually posted something last night, and there's this little clip from one of those parody movies. It's called Superhero Movie. It's like a parody of all these superhero movies. And it's Leslie Nielsen, the guy from The Naked Gun. Yeah. And the kid walks into the door and Leslie Nielsen shoots a nail gun his way. And the kid just dodges it and grabs it in the air. And he's just like, what? How'd you do that? He was just like, I'm just got a good night's sleep or something. And then Kevin Hart's character was standing right next to Leslie Nielsen. He aims the gun at his hand and immediately shoots him right in the hand. But then I created a little meme. If real talk, if you're not following me on Instagram, I'm at Shawn Model. If I wasn't doing this, I could just full-time create memes and I'd be killing it, to be honest. But anyway, so I created this meme that basically, this is what happens when you lock in on eating good food, exercising, and getting great sleep consistently. Like, it's like a different reality opens up for you, and you don't really realize when you're in it, when you're in that fog, how good you can feel, you know. And it's just one of those things I see consistently, and it clearly happened for you because once you started getting well, like everything changed.
Everything changed, right? You don't even know what you're about or what you have to share, I feel like, when you're just managing. And so no, my whole life is completely transformed.
Well, this is where we're getting into the nuts and bolts. Whoever came up with that, by the way, the nuts and berries.
It's a different thing.
I want to provide a little bit more context because, you know, your experience and what you've created is so special, and it's a big reason why you're here right now. And it's such a great opportunity for all of us to be able to learn from you. But I just want to provide a little bit more context on why we need to focus on this issue right now. This study was published in the journal Gastroenterology, again, the primary journal on the subject, and it found that approximately 70 million Americans are suffering with digestive issues right now. It's crazy. This is a huge chunk of our population, and it's just become normalized. And that data was from 2012, by the way. All right, so that's 10 years ago. You think things have gotten worse or better? You already know the answer, everybody. Now, in 2009, there were over 245,000 deaths from digestive diseases. Crazy stuff. You don't hear about this. And again, things have gotten significantly worse. But my point being that the most prevalent digestive issues like IBS aren't directly considered to be deadly issues, but over time it can lead to the development of chronic diseases and things that actually do shorten our lifespan, but specifically shorten our quality of life. Can you talk about specifically why processed foods are a huge part of this problem?
Oh, yes. Well, basically because our bodies, our environment has changed dramatically, right? But our bodies really haven't. And so what's happening is we're wired to really eat what we can and expend as little energy as possible. And today, when there's food everywhere, right? Processed food, and we are also wired for really simple kind of like textures and flavors. And right now we're just bombarded with all of these different processed foods. They're taking out the nutrients, they're adding additives, they're spending millions of dollars in order to create these combinations that will make you not want to stop eating. But also not having enough flavor so that you stop. So you kind of like, it's messing and hijacking our satiety signals. And as a result, 60% of our calories today come from ultra processed foods. And this was my story. It also hijacks your dopaminergic system, right? And soon after time, if you're eating it and eating it and eating it, pretty much you need more soon and more and more, and it doesn't. So we're kind of stuck in this vicious cycle where the majority of the things we're eating are kind of more like they're not even real food. And this not only displaces other food that could actually be nourishing us and building those cells and everything in our body in a really, robust and full of like vitality way, but we're also just putting in foods that could harm us as well with the sugar and the additives. And for some people, things like gluten and soy and on and on. And this is the bulk of our diet today, and our bodies can't keep up.
Oh, man, I've never thought about it. Like you just said, that dopamine component.
Yeah.
You just reframed something for me, which is even with something like alcohol, for example, if you consistently are drinking, you build up a tolerance over time, right, to get that same effect. And also a tendency towards drinking more because you build up that tolerance, right? And the same thing is occurring with these processed foods.
Absolutely. Yes, that was what I was eating when I was having my digestive issues, of course. I learned the pretty bad advice that a calorie was just a calorie. I grew up as a ballerina, so I knew all I had to do was keep it within a certain amount of calories. I had caramel apple suckers every day and big hunks, and I was not eating high quality food at all, and I didn't really know how to get out of that cycle, and that's all I wanted to eat. And I think had I known food mattered, and if I could have gotten off that treadmill of just eating processed foods, my digestive issues would have probably went away almost immediately. But I was just stuck in the cycle, I think, like a lot of people are, unfortunately, today.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that we are wired for simplicity. Like, A light bulb went off when you said that.
It's such a fascinating thing. I had a really cool conversation with Rob Wolf, and they've got this down to a science, right? So they create these combinations with millions of dollars of research where they'll give you just enough flavor to keep you want to keep eating so that you don't want to stop, but not enough that it would actually make your appetite like shut off so that you don't reach that satiety point. And he tells this story of where he found out there's like this bag of Doritos, and they're called the Dorito Roulette or something like this. And he noticed every other one was very spicy, but you couldn't predict it. And I guess it was according to like a power log distribution. And he called the company. He's like, "Oh, did you guys make this according to that? Like, was this intentional?" And they were like, "Wow, we are so impressed. Do you know that?" And yes, because it's kind of a maximally addictive experience when you can't predict where the really intense flavor is going to come from.
This is blowing my mind because I look for that chip.
You do
that right chip.
Yes,
you know, like because you'll have one and then the next one's like that's not, and then maybe two later. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Holy.
This is how much work goes into just helping you not be able to eat just one.
Oh my god. Yeah. That is so crazy. All right, this is blowing my mind. I feel so taken advantage of right now. Yeah. I feel a little Dorito dirty. But, you know, here's the thing in addition. You know, if we're looking at, again, we evolved as a species, even if we're not even talking about the countless centuries prior, but just in the last couple of thousand years, we're still eating very simple foods, simple textures, simple combinations of real food, right? We can, quote, process them, but it's going to be something that is of minor incidence versus today, which is, you mentioned 60% is ultra processed foods, right? And so that simplicity of maybe a few flavors or foods combined and textures combined, our brain is simply not able to handle the complexity of a Applejack. You know what I mean? Like there's no chance. And so the reason that Applejack even jumped up is because like my brain remembers, you know, like my brain is like, that was good times, Shawn, you know? And so being able to, how do you even break that addiction? Because you mentioned like dopamine is driving us. It's a motivator, moving us towards this. Is it just like, again, you sit somewhere in the corner and you quote detox and you get the jitters and try to tough your way through it? Or do we, you know, have some transition foods? Like what happened for you? How did you go from IBS and this constant just conflict going on internally to being free of that? And not only just in a state of health, but then so healthy you want to help and serve other people.
Yeah, I think it started with that pain, right? It went on long enough and it was intense enough to feel that way that when my husband proposed, okay, we're just going to pull these foods out, I thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. For a while, it looked like Monday through Friday, I was really good. And then Saturdays and Sundays, we went a little crazy, right? So there was a transition period. But pretty soon, it became very clear the way I felt was dramatically different when I didn't eat those foods. And over time, like, I don't even have to think about it now. I have to actually tell myself, like, come on, have a little more. You know, like, you could have some sugar, you know, like something every once in a while. And it's totally on the other side only because of the way I feel and who I am. It's not only like a physical thing. There's a stability about, you know, not being on a blood sugar roller coaster, not being in the middle of all this chaos that you're creating simply because your biology is imbalanced. And so over time, seeing that new side of yourself, I think is very reinforcing. But do know some transition foods that I used were just things like our bars, like really high quality, like food bars that still felt like that. Really dark chocolate. That's something. I'm a very sweet girl, so I really like dark chocolate, or, you know, or just having fun food Friday. This is what my family does now, is we practice very healthful living. We don't bring things into the house, but on Friday we all decide exactly what we want and we go out, and if we go to 3 different places, that's what we do. And we just kind of make it an event to still celebrate food, but not make that our usual course of action.
I love that so much. And, you know, even sharing that, because there's different bridges,
yes,
right? There's many paths to the goal.
Yes.
And so having that cheat meal paradigm, basically, where you're doing the Monday through Friday, then the cheat meals. And this brings up an important point because, again, that can be a bridge, but at the same time, there's probably going to be some hangover
Oh,
that tends to happen, especially if you're giving your body the things it's been looking for all this time and your symptoms resolve, and then boom, you hit yourself with, these typical things in the name of like, I'm just going to take a few days off.
oh, especially because I was working as a fitness trainer. And so it was dramatic. I'd come in on Monday and I'd feel terrible and I wouldn't perform well. I just didn't feel like I wanted to inspire people. I didn't feel like what I was doing was very inspirational. And quickly I realized, you know what? It's a simple switch, and when you see that new side of yourself, it's easier than you'd think. And so if anyone's just kind of on the fence, I think it's just definitely worth diving in no matter which path you take. But over time, you'll see a dramatic difference.
You know what? I'm part of the reason I think that I've been able to connect with so many people is that I'm a fan of food. Like I love tasty things, and I think we've been inundated with the belief that those tasty things have to be unhealthy. They have to be these things that have all of these, chemicals and additives, but the reality is much different, but it's like taking back control of your biology. And I'm saying this to say that I have a little bit of an issue with the word cheat. And I've kind of impressed upon culture a little bit with this. So this idea has kind of gotten out there a little bit. But just to reiterate it, there isn't anything else really in our culture that we attach the word cheat to that is tolerable or socially accepted as okay, right? So if you're like, cheating at sports, bad. If you're cheating on your spouse, bad. If you're cheating on a test, bad. Cheating on food, good. Right? It just like, that doesn't cognitively, it's telling yourself, because cheat is attached to something that's bad. Right? Or something you're not supposed to do. And it's not the fact of like enjoying and having a different food experience. It's the psychology of throwing the word cheat on there can be troublesome for some people, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's no morality in food, right?
Yeah.
It's just the decision that you made today. And sometimes I make that decision, right? I not cheating, but just decide to prioritize pleasure for a moment. And I think there's value in that too.
Yeah. So you're not being a bad girl.
No, I'm still a great person,
Yeah.
right? I'm just making a different choice.
Yeah.
Making a choice that I might need in that moment. I think a lot of us have lost touch with prioritizing pleasure, and it's actually something that's very, very important.
Yeah.
So
It's what it's part of life.
we're wired for it.
Yes.
Right? And I think it's easy to lose sight of that in today's world, but it's actually something I do when I work with people. I have them do a pleasure inventory of, food and non-food based activities, because I think it's something so many people have lost touch with. Just like if you woke up on a day off and you had nothing to do, where would you be? And like, who would be with you? And where would you go? And just like knowing those things and making time for those things, I think is one of the best things. It's one of the more impactful exercises for most people I work with.
I love that pleasure inventory. That reminds me of this Janet Jackson song, Pleasure Principle. Yes. Back in the day.
Love Janet.
Shout out to Janet, icon alert. But also you said a really powerful word there, which was morality. Giving morality to food is one of the things that can psychologically beat us up, that can lead to a situation where it definitely leans into eating disorders a little bit stronger when we're giving morality to food, because we tie our identity to our behaviors. And so if we're cheating, if we're doing bad things, then we have to have a punishment, right? Yeah. It's just these are some of the issues that can, they're well intended, but for the majority of people, they can't handle these because they haven't done the inner work necessary to be able to identify, like, what does this word mean to me? What does this feeling mean to me? And so we were talking about this before the show, about people doing the work and being able to have introspection and to question their beliefs and their biases so that they can appropriately step into these things. And I want to ask you about this because, being that the world has shifted so much, you mentioned that we're hardwired for simple flavors, right? Simple food, simple experiences. Not to say we can't dress it up and have something amazing, but right now we've been inundated with this paradigm that highly processed plant-based foods are ideal, right? Versus the simple foods that we evolved with as, having hunter-gatherer DNA, right? And it's because of the framing that it's because this is plant-based, even though it's highly processed, ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
And so our recommendations, government guidelines, all those things have been shifted dramatically. And contrary to popular belief, our consumption of things like red meat have plummeted by like 44%. You sent the paper over to me.
I did. It's a crazy 2022 analysis they did. They did both food availability data, just like what was available, and then also adjusted for loss. And it was so counter to what we're hearing in the mainstream narrative that I couldn't believe it. So processed foods between the years of 1800 and 2017 or 19, depending on the statistic, went from below 5% of calories to over 60%. And then grains increased by 30%, and sugar, it depends on the type of sugar, but sugar definitely went up. And what they were looking at is the relationship to non-communicable diseases, which we all know is rising precipitously. The really fascinating part, red meat and animal fats, the two foods that most people demonize, our mainstream government dietary recommendations, they actually went down. Red meat by 21% when adjusted for loss, and foods like lard by 78%. I think butter stayed around the same. But the piece of research actually concluded that saturated fats from animals have an inverse relationship with non-communicable diseases in that time period.
Wow. Inverse relationship. Let's clarify what we mean by
that.
this.
That means the more that you eat, the lower your risk of disease, or that's at least how it appeared from this. And we have to remember, we've been eating animal-based foods and simple foods and whole foods, 2.2 million years. And it's only in the last few decades since we've had our recommendations that our health has been declining rapidly.
We'll put this study for everybody in the show notes, but this was published in Frontiers in Nutrition, Nutritional Epidemiology. The title of the study is United States Dietary Trends Since 1800. It's a nice lifespan of this. Lack of association, and this is the title of the study, lack of association between saturated fatty acid consumption and non-communicable diseases, right? So again, that was a thing that even I went to a conventional university. I had my nutritional science class that I paid for, and we were taught that, saturated fat is going to kill you. Like literally the teachers just like beating this over our heads constantly to avoid saturated fat. And again, so the consumption of these from natural food sources has went down significantly, yet these chronic conditions have skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Because the question is, what do we replace that with? Mm-hmm. And it's highly refined. And again, I don't want to create a schism here, because it's not that plants are bad. We're talking about taking plant foods,
right,
and then creating Apple Jacks. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And the other thing I didn't mention too is vegetable oils. The new fats on the scene have increased maybe more dramatically than any other food group, actually, more than sugar and processed foods. So, yeah. And also, even back in the day when Ansel Keys did his original research and he looked at 6 different countries and the more fat they ate, it looked like the greater their risk for heart disease. But then some statisticians came along and reevaluated the data based on the 22 available data points. What was interesting is most people will tell you that the relationship wasn't there, but it still was. But what wasn't there, what was very interesting, is when you adjust it for total mortality, it looked like animal fats and protein were actually protective. So in other words, a lot of nuance. But when we hear these messages, what we have to do is kind of verify them, right? Does it make sense historically? What does the bulk of the data show? And does it matter if it decreases our risk of heart disease, but all increases the risk of everything else?
So recently we had on Dr. Kate Shanahan, who is reiterating this point. And, she's been a good friend for the last few years. Amazing impact. She worked with the Lakers, kind of helped extend Kobe's career, got him on bone broth, all this stuff. And, the crazy thing is she shared with me some data and this is what I love about what you sent. We're looking at a huge span of time here. Like we're talking about going back to the 1800s. But there were some biopsies that were done in the earlier part of the 1900s, looking at what is the actual makeup of a human fat cell, right? And so the average human's fat cell, in the U.S. population, was the construct of the fat cell itself, like around 2 to upwards of like 3, maybe 5% PUFAs, right? Polyunsaturated fatty acids. Today, doing that same biopsy, the polyunsaturated fatty acid makeup of a cell, a biopsy from a human cell, is around 25%, right? So the cell itself, the ingredients that make up a human have changed so dramatically, right? And the question is like, where the hell are all, it's not that polyunsaturated fats are bad. Like in a normal human, through our evolution, we had some, and our cells were made of some. Now the recipe has changed of what we're made of. Like we're different. If you change the recipe, like you're going to have a different outcome. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so now it's just like, where are all these PUFAs coming from? And what is the answer?
Vegetable oils, right? And do you know this history of how vegetable oils came into being?
Please share.
It's fascinating. So William Procter and James Gamble, entrepreneurs, they had soap and candles they were making, and electricity came around, so candle sales went down, but they had this surplus of cottonseed oil. And they thought, what do we do with this? So the advent of hydrogenation happened recently. They decided, well, we'll hydrogenate it, which means they'll take a liquid fat and they'll make it a solid fat. And when they did it, it looked like lard. It looked like animal fats. And so without any substantiation of its health benefits or detriments, they launched this massive marketing campaign, and they convinced Americans that this was the cleaner cooking fat, that it would liberate women from the kitchen because they weren't churning butter, and that our kids would have better moral character. I mean, they went after rabbis and celebrities, and it worked. And we now know that the way that Crisco was originally made, 50% of it was trans fat. And trans fat, according to the World Health Organization, kills 500,000 people every year. And again, that's only to say, not that vegetable oils are dangerous. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they definitely go against history. And it's not something I think people have really looked into, at least when Crisco was created. It was more like, this is convenient. Let's see what happens.
Crisco was a staple,
Yeah, and it's different. There's a different recipe now. It definitely doesn't still have 50% trans fat, but I just think we need to question, right? Yeah. Like, are these newfangled food things that we're eating, are they really going to provide the same level of health as what we've been doing for millions of years?
Yeah, I would err on the side of like what got us here. You know what I mean? But that is so fascinating, because it's one of the things that people largely can agree upon is this trans fat paradigm. Because again, I was taught that in that same class, saturated fats and trans fats. But even with that, it comes with, for me, it's just like, are trans fats even really, is that the full story? Yeah. Because we're going to find traces here or there, but that's the key. Traces, if we're talking about naturally occurring foods and minimal processing. But today, with these highly refined oils and literally the creation of trans fats in concentrated forms, wow, like that's something that our biology isn't really acclimated to handle. You know what I mean? So I want to ask you about this, because a major issue for sure is still, if we're looking at the paradigm of animal foods and how things have been done in recent decades, it's scary. If we look at the foods resulting from conventional farming methods, the quality has really snowballed downward in many ways, again, versus what we evolved with. So can you talk about some of the major problems that we're having right now in conventional agriculture? Because it's really important for us to know.
Yeah. Basically, when we walk into a food store today, about 95% of the products, animal products, are coming from confined animal feeding operations, right? And we've all kind of seen the pictures where animals are taken out of their natural setting, and they're, somewhat stressful conditions, and these systems, industrial systems, they came from a good intention. I think it's important to acknowledge that. We had a fear that the exploding population we weren't going to be able to keep up with it, right? We had grain surpluses, we had new supplements, and so they came with that. But what we didn't know is these unintended consequences, like animal welfare issues. I can't say this enough. It's just, I think that removing animals from the natural setting, how they used to be raised, and giving them very little space. And actually, this is interesting, making them eat one thing, right? We all have different foods that are healing to our bio-individuality, right? And Animals, Dr. Fred Provenza does a lot of research around it. They self-select. They medicate. They can prevent illness. They can create vitality, but they can't in these systems, right? And then also, they're handled. So the animal welfare issue is such a big deal to me. The second one is environmental issue. When we had these pasture-based systems where we moved the animals around, their manure was actually an asset because 50% of the fertilizers used worldwide are actually manure-based. But when we have thousands of animals on top of each other, that becomes a source of pollution. It decomposes, it creates air pollution. We know kids living near CAFOs have higher rates of asthma, and respiratory issues are rampant in people who work in CAFOs. And then we have the additives that are being used, right? There's one called ractopamine. It's a beta agonist and it's banned in 160 countries and linked to heart palpitations in humans and poisonings in China and maybe aggressiveness in the animals themselves, but we still use it here. Antibiotics, 73% of the antibiotics used worldwide are used in animal agriculture. And when we use antibiotics at this sub-therapeutic level, it's something Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, actually warned against this very scenario, that the bugs, the bacteria, they'll mutate, they'll create antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and we might see a day where we can't use antibiotics for simple infections anymore. And that's absolutely terrifying to me. And another one of the issues is the social impact, right? In America, when it began, 50% of the people living in America were involved in food production. And that creates an investment in your community and accountability, and it creates food security. Today, these big corporations, there's 4 of them in the meat industry that control much of the processing. They essentially buy up land, like in Missouri. Smithfield owns about 50,000 acres. And then they outsource their pollution to us. And then again, a handful of CEOs in far-off countries are making decisions that impact our community, decisions that impact the health of our soil, which is essentially the health of our communities and our people living within them. And so I think that was a big step back that kind of took us out of the system. And more recently, we've realized COVID showed us how important food security is, food sovereignty, having our own supply that we control. But essentially, that's been gone with our current methods as well.
We are a result of the soil.
Yes.
As a species. As I'm looking at you, I'm seeing everything that's come from the soil, whether it's directly from the plants or the animals that ate those plants.
Yeah.
We are a result of the soil.
It's fascinating, right? Yeah, 98% of the foods that we eat are coming from there. There's, we're creating energy in the soil. Biodiversity. When we have biodiverse microorganisms living in the soil, we have more plants, we have more animals. We're at a point in history we have actually the lowest level of minerals in our soil right now. You're supposedly, according to Dr. David Johnson, you have to eat 2 times as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, and 4 to 5 times as much vegetables as you would have in 1940. But the reason isn't because they're not there. Dr. Christine Jones has shown the reason is because those microorganisms living in the soil, that biology has been broken. They've been killed by our current and extractive and chemical-based agriculture. And so, by restoring the soil, we restore the health of the plants, the animals, the humans, the environment. We can also sequester carbon in soil, right? And this is a big thing for climate change. I know some people don't think it's as big a deal as others, but the truth is carbon levels are rising. And while a lot of people are focused on emissions, the bigger question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to take it out of the air and soil? In the top meter of soil, there are 3 times as much carbon as there are in the entire atmosphere. And so when we are not paying attention to the soil, we are missing all that it is to have health, essentially.
Oh, wow. That's so powerful. And just to circle back, I mean, you mentioned this, that even for the animals, they are a result of the soil as well. And so there's this culture now of these mono meals. What happens when we have mono meals ourselves, where we're just fed one thing for months or years on end? We're going to develop so many different abnormalities. And the thing is, there's an intelligence within every species to know what to eat when left to their own devices. Like, what if you're sick? Like, certain animals will go to certain weeds or certain plants just in nature to medicate themselves, to help them to heal. But that intelligence is taken away, and they're just shoveled this kind of mono feed, shall we put it like that, where, we're just going to add in these different things. And of course, antibiotics is going to be laced in here. You mentioned that 73% of the antibiotics used in the world are for feed, for animals. Yeah. There should be two questions that come up. Why the hell?
Yeah.
Number one, and that being two answers to one question. One being, of course, these animals are going to develop a myriad of diseases because of their malnutrition and eating abnormal things that this animal is not designed to eat in the first place. I've never seen a cow like shucking corn and like, you know what I mean? Like that would be super weird if you saw like, how do you like, you know? That's number one. But number two is, and I mentioned this in my latest book, in Eat Smarter, a really great meta-analysis looking at how antibiotics are utilized to help to encourage weight gain for these animals, right? And so multiple studies have found this to be true, but also that was the intention. It was kind of accidentally stumbled upon, but then it became the intention. Like, if you want your animals to grow, you know, farmers are inundated with these ideas, and they're just trying to do their job as well.
I know, absolutely. They're the heroes in this whole story. They're just trapped in a system that's prioritizing efficiency. And like you said, when they use antibiotics, they gain weight more quickly. And there was some regulation in 2016. They're not supposed to use it for a weight gain, but it still can be used to prevent illness. And so there isn't really...
That's a loophole big enough to drive.
It is. It is. So it still happens. And... you know, a lot of deaths worldwide, 700,000 each year from antibiotic resistance. So I think if there's one thing I really want to change about this system is the fact that antibiotics have to go. And there's even really tricky ways that they label them. But yeah, that's one of the worst things we're doing currently.
So, you know, you've been somebody who's done something about this, you know, and this is, I mean, I admire you so much for this because you have to have the audacity, like, to be like, you know, I'm going to do something that's so huge because the degradation of our soil has led to, it's one of the components to the degradation of our species.
Yeah.
And it's gotten so bad. Most people have no idea about this. Like, we're just going, again, you go to a grocery store, you see all these items. We're so disassociated from where this is coming from. As you mentioned, 50% of people had their hands in the process. Now it's like, what? 1%, maybe, you know what I mean? Probably far less than that. Like, most people have no connection to where their food is coming from in our society today. Now, that's a whole other issue in and of itself. But when we're talking about the soil quality, and that's determining the quality of food and determining the quality of people as a result, right now there's this movement taking place that more people need to be aware of and to get on board with, to contribute to vote with your dollar, and it's regenerative agriculture. And again, you've like stepped up in a major way to actually do something to help to change this situation. So can you talk about what regenerative agriculture is and what you've been doing to actually make a change?
Yeah, so I became aware of this issue because of the farmers, because we had relationships with farmers and they were teaching me about the nuance in the different kind of systems. And I think we've realize from our discussion that we've been living in this extractive relationship with the earth, right? We've been taking out more than we're putting back and prioritizing efficiency over ecology. And 70%, they say, of the soil today is degraded. And that there's only 60 years of topsoil left, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization. So regenerative agriculture, a lot of people are looking to sustainability and a lot of people are looking to organic. But what they're missing is we can't sustain this, right? Where we are, our soil, it's like a broken cup. It doesn't hold water. You know, the food is lower quality. And so we need to regenerate or bring back to a higher or more worthy state. And that's exactly what regenerative agriculture does. It has a set of principles that says, okay, how is this land now and how do we get it back? So some of them are things like not disturbing the soil, least disturbance. Tilling is actually pretty detrimental. It can cause water evaporation and carbon goes into the air. Also maximizing photosynthesis, because the plants are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and they're turning it into carbohydrates that feed these microorganisms. And so the more we can do that, the better. And that's going to create those microorganisms, then make the minerals and nutrients in the soil and the water available to the plants. And then adding animals. There's this narrative that animals are destroying our ecosystems. But if you've ever seen Dr. Alan Savory's TED Talk, where he was working in Africa and he was trying to restore the land, and he actually ordered for a lot of elephants to be killed. And what happened to the land was that it didn't get better. And he realized that it was this disturbance, this animal, when they come in and they break things down and their hoof, they make water for, or space for water, and they fertilize it, and then they stimulate grass growth. Like, our ecosystems need animals, and when you use them in a highly managed way, it's a beautiful process. And then adding biodiversity, right? I think since 1970, 68% of our biodiversity is disappearing. Pollinators, birds, and this regenerative agriculture restores that. And the last one is just making sure there's context. Like, no two farms are going to be alike, no two ranches are alike. And so it's really, one of our farmers likens it to a friendship, right? You kind of look at your plot of land and you watch it over time. And so it's a movement away from chemical agriculture and a movement to prioritize biology, essentially. And there's some really exciting and emerging research around it. But yeah, we've basically partnered with regenerative farmers because they didn't want to put themselves out there. They didn't want to market themselves. They're like, we want to hang here and fix the soil and be with our animals. And so we decided to cut out the middleman, because I do think we're at a point in history where we have to, right? I don't want to give my child a planet where he can't grow his food one day. And I truly think we're just borrowing this planet from future generations. And so we just made an effort to help people access it, help people understand, but then also make it affordable enough that this can actually move a needle and put a dent in the current system so that we can all kind of contribute.
Yeah. We only have this. This is our home.
Yes.
And I think we can get caught up in the movies and think we could, jump to another dimension or multiverse or something, or live off planet, but that's not the reality, no. Especially not anytime soon. We've got to take care of this. And if you just look at this one concept, one visual concept that we all can see, is like these fields of monocrops, right? Fields of wheat, right? We've all seen it before. You've at least seen images of it. Fields of corn, just miles and miles of the same plant, on various farms. And again, I love that you mentioned this, that it wasn't necessarily a nefarious beginning, right? It's largely, in many ways, a mission to feed America, feed the world, with the growing population. But somewhere along the lines, there's always going to be people who manipulate the system and take advantage, regardless of the outcomes. Again, thinking very short-sighted, myself right now, myself, my family, this generation now, not caring about what's going to happen, the ramifications. But even that, it's just like, we don't want to hold so much disdain towards people. Again, that people are just largely doing what they feel is best. Now, of course, there's some dark stuff out there. There is. But for the most part, we got to look at, like, okay, we took a wrong turn. We had a decent intention. And now we're at this place where, because of this, basically what we do is we have this monocropping where we just have fields and fields and fields of soy, or fields and fields and fields of corn, that it does not exist in nature. Agriculture is one of those leverage points that's helped us to create cities and all this stuff. But if you think about what is sustainable, that's not. And what happens is, when you do that, the soil is destroyed. Right. And it doesn't have that animal husbandry or interaction to sustain the soil, because that's what the soil required forever. And so basically we create a desolate land, and then we just go to the next land, right, and destroy it again. And so that's why you mentioned, like, 70% of the soil has been severely damaged. Now, there was a time when I was like, this would bother me quite a bit, because I was of the belief that, man, it's going to take thousands of years to fix this, or, it can't be fixed once it's destroyed. But that's not the case.
No, it's amazing. And that's when we talk to our farmers, they say that basically, human intervention is finite, right? We don't want to be relying on a system where we have to come and fix things. He says nature knows exactly what to do. And she's like a horse behind a gate. We just have to get out of the way. And they say that they can visually see that soil, like, over the years just growing. Like, their farms are literally getting higher and higher. And you've read accounts like Gabe Brown's farm. They are increasing the percentage of organic matter in the soil by percentage points every single year. And yeah, we did used to think that it took like 500 years to build soil, but we're realizing that it can be a lot faster than we thought. And there's been estimates all over the place that, just to sequester the amount of carbon that it would take to come to the point of drawdown, essentially where we're reducing emissions, it could take 5 years. If we all pitch in, it could take only 10 to 20% of agricultural lands. It depends on the estimate. It's a very nuanced topic, but nature comes back quicker than you'd think it would.
Yeah, sure. It's so crazy.
It's cool.
If anybody's seen the film Sacred Cow, and we did a show with Rob on it, but you can see firsthand, this guy basically transforming a desert into viable land and viable soil, and just like, it's so amazing. Like you said, it's kind of like the same thing with our health. Our bodies know what to do. Oftentimes we just need to get out of the way, maybe provide some of the foundational tenets for it to do what it needs to do. But the biggest problem is we're constantly intervening and putting the wrong stuff in the way of the natural healing.
Exactly. Yeah, and I liken it to, our current system of medicine, right? We're chasing symptoms, that's kind of like conventional agriculture. Like, we have some weeds, we'll just put some chemicals on it. We don't have the nutrients, we're just going to add some fertilizer. Whereas I think regenerative agriculture is more like functional medicine. It's like, let's look at the root. Like, what are we actually needing in order to remedy this situation? And then looking at it case by case basis. So absolutely. We don't need to intervene. Nature never really needed us in the way that we've tried to provide for her recently. We just need to go back to ancient principles, use what we've learned, right? You can have electric fencing. You can make it more modern and more efficient. Absolutely. But like you're saying, nature knows, and I don't think we're going to outdo her anytime soon. And if we keep trying, I don't like where we're headed.
Yeah, I love that too. The integration of technology, like you said, with electric fencing, because how things would be done historically is, we have grazing of animals and then they go to a different place, right?
Yes.
Today, they just destroy the area and then they're forced to find another place for grazing to set up shop or whatever the case might be, versus using some of this technology to kind of circulate where the animals are going, and again, helping to regenerate the soil as they're going along and doing their thing in a certain spot. Like, it's all working together.
It's absolutely working together. And that's kind of why I think grass-fed gets a bad name, because there's a lot of flavors of grass-fed, right? There is continuous grazing, and that is damaging to the environment. But you're right, when you bring the electric fencing and just these highly managed systems where they're on a plot of land for a few days and then they're moving and then they're moving and they're moving, it's exactly what the earth requires, and it's bringing the best of both worlds together.
Yeah. So again, you've stepped up in a big way to help to remedy this situation. And Wild Pastures, this is a part of my family's life as well. And it's so cool. Like, the stuff that you do, that you have a hand in, is like making my body that you're looking at.
Appreciate that. I love that.
So can you talk a little bit about Wild Pastures?
Yeah. So Wild Pastures was when my son was born and we had those relationships with our farmers and I had my nutrition practice. Everyone was like, Autumn, this is a great idea. I want to support these farmers. I don't know where to find them, and it's way too expensive when I do. And so we thought, why don't we just connect the farmers using regenerative methods to the consumers who wanted to vote with their dollar, but also do it at an affordable price. And the other thing that was very different is that a lot of the grass-fed meat was coming out of other countries. And if you think about that, we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to heal our soil. And we're also, I love that other countries have great standards, but we need that food sovereignty here. We need our soil microbiome to be healthy. And we need American farmers to be incentivized to use these regenerative methods. And so we only source domestic. And basically, we just deliver the meat straight to your door. It shows up. It's simple. There's a lot of different options. And it's pretty delicious, too.
Awesome. So cool. So obviously there's a lot of wonderful companies that are stepping up to improve the food, what people are getting delivered to their homes, the accessibility, all that. But what you're doing is a step above all of these things, because we're looking at true regenerative agriculture, and you have something really special for us. So if everybody goes to wildpastures.com/model, you're going to get 20% off every box of Wild Pastures regenerative agriculture raised meat for life. 20% off. And you can manage which box you're getting, plus an additional $15 off. So this is an investment in your family and your food quality, but also helping to heal our planet.
It's amazing. And it's like 44% lower cost than a lot of other comparative meat delivery services, because we're passionate about the mission. We think it's going to take a significant amount of people, and we think everyone deserves high quality food. And so even though inflation is running rampant and fuel costs are up and all of that, we are kind of taking it on the nose just so that people can still have access and feed their families in the way that they'd like to.
Yeah, it's really amazing what you're doing. And again, like the quality and what's happening behind the scenes to be at that price point compared to what other companies have. Not to say that, again, other companies are doing some great work as well, but this is checking all the boxes, literally. So again, that was wildpastures.com/model. That's WILDPASTURES.com/model. 20% off every box for life, and an additional $15 off right now too. So go to wildpastures.com/model. There's something else that people need to know as well, though.
Yeah, because we're dealing with live animals, and because we have such high standards, there's only a certain amount of people and memberships that we can take each month. And so if you're interested, you might, definitely check it out sooner than later. And we apologize. We hope to grow and make access more widely available, but for right now, that's the reality.
Yeah. Exclusive.
It is.
Exclusive alert.
Yes.
So take action ASAP. And again, like you've already grown this substantially from when it began. And again, this is what's in our freezer, and also understanding that this is just another logical step in not just human health, but also, again, in improving what's happening with our environment. And I wanted to ask you about this as well, because we didn't spend much time on this, is what's being utilized for treatment of the soil, right? And trying to quote, well, the irony here, and I'm struggling to even say this because we're trying to kill stuff, basically,
right,
with the pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and rodenticides. These are being used to kill organisms in the soil that would normally be there. And again, this kind of symbiotic relationship and allowing plants to even develop resiliency. Now we have this very kind of superficial cookie cutter plant that's all one thing, one way, and it has no resilience. Like a lot of plants can't even populate in the wild anymore. Like it needs human intervention just to do anything, just to grow and to survive.
Yep.
And so the reason I bring this up is we're doing the same thing with antibiotic use with humans, and the same thing with, the consumption of pesticides and herbicides and rodenticides from the foods that we're eating, treated with this stuff.
Absolutely. And the sad thing is, when they started using them, they didn't understand, right? They didn't understand the microbial life in the soil. And so they looked like a good idea. But the reality is we need this weed killers and all of this because our plants are weak, because they're mineral deficient, because they don't have the relationships with these soil microorganisms. And so when we're supporting those practices, we're killing that biology, and essentially we're killing the plant life and ourselves at the end of the day. And we all know there's thousands of lawsuits against Bayer right now for exposure to things like glyphosate and these chemicals that we're using. There have been some huge settlements, right, linking this exposure, occupational exposure specifically, to cancer and lymphoma and things like that. So yeah, it's a dangerous path that we're on, but one that we can absolutely correct with a little awareness.
The problem is that the onus is on us as individuals to prove that these products are doing us harm.
Right.
Instead of regulations, the EPA and all these other organizations are supposed to be looking out for the environment, looking out for us, making sure that this stuff is safe first.
Yeah.
Instead, we have to prove that it's hurting us versus them proving that it's safe. And so in addition to that, so you mentioned glyphosate, that's on the tip of a lot of people's tongue, hopefully not literally.
Yeah.
But but there's another one that's really popular, pesticide, chlorpyrifos. And it's been caught up in red tape. It's still legal, but proven birth defects, cancer agent, but also it's one of these things that's been found to damage microbial gene expression, right? So most of the genes in our body are not human genes, right? If we're going gene for gene, over 99% of our genes are microbial. And what damage is being done when we're literally messing up these genetic programs of the species that, help to make us who we are. So we got to keep all this stuff in mind, and just this stuff has been going on for decades, unchecked. And the crazy thing is, even though the data exists on the harm, it can get caught up in red tape, depending on who's in office, or depending on lobbyists and all these things.
That's what I'm saying. We can't wait for regulation necessarily, because we might be waiting a really long time. And that's why I think shows like yours are really important, because we have to decide what works for us. We have to decide to use the precautionary principle, because in some ways we are being looked out for, but in other ways it's absolutely blatantly not the case. And this is one of them. I think these systems are prioritizing profit, right? Prioritizing yield, and they're not noticing the detriment to our health and the detriment to our environment. And so we can change it by us noticing and not waiting.
Yeah. When you mention shows like this existing, it's kind of like nature again finds a way, whether it's through, it's kind of like an Avatar situation. All right. So I'm like one of those blue fellas, it's just like nature's communicating through to like help to, it's forcing innovation. It's forcing insight. It's forcing revelation. It's forcing, perspective, perspective shifts. And one of the things over the years that was like a staple for me, but I would always go to different companies to find it for years. Like, and I would talk about it from time to time, but it was always complicated. Like my vitamin C supplement, so I would go like, I would get camu from this place. I would get amla from this place, acerola cherry. Those are my three favorites, for many years. And it went back to some data from a former head of the USDA who was checking through all the botanical sources of vitamin C and just found all these remarkable benefits with camu berry. And he was like, of course, like he kind of was in a way a little bit disheartened by what he was seeing at the USDA. So he was actually a botanist at the USDA, not necessarily the head, but distinguished scientist, prestigious botanist, the whole thing. But again, he was a little bit disillusioned by what he was seeing, and he sought out to find like what are the real access that we have as far as nutritional content of these various plants. And so we start to look outside of the box, right? Because in the United States, like we largely are eating out of boxes, right? And we're thinking in boxes, you know what I mean? If you got a car like Shauna, we're driving in boxes, shout out to my friend Shauna's here. But, being able to access foods and food sources that humans have been utilizing for thousands of years is something really special, because you put that together in a formula all in one place with the essential C complex at Paleo Valley. And it's something, again, I have on a regular basis. I travel with it because for years, of course, I'm paying attention to what the science is showing with the benefits from vitamin C, but specifically botanical sources.
It's amazing, isn't it? I was really surprised when I started creating products that 90% of the vitamin C on the market is derived from genetically modified corn, right? And I don't want to say there's never benefit in times of serious illness, and you need intravenous vitamin C. I think there's a time and a place, but there is research to suggest they're different, right? Vitamin C in synthetic form is just the antioxidant outer shell, right? There's so many other compounds in there, factors P and J and tyrosinase and ascorbic and all of these other botanicals, like you're saying, that make the whole food vitamin C molecule different, right? So there's one cool trial that I love. It was in smokers, and they chose smokers because they generally have higher levels of oxidative stress. And they gave some of them camu juice, camu, which you're talking about, one of the world's greatest sources of vitamin C, and then the other one, ascorbic acid. And then they looked at what happened to their levels of inflammation over the course of the next few days. And they found that only the whole food vitamin C was actually able to reduce inflammation and oxidative stress, and that the ascorbic acid didn't. And so there's a magic, there's a synergy to whole foods that I think we miss out on when we use other forms of isolated nutrients.
You got to say that again, 90%?
Yeah. And it's funny because for a long time it was all made out of one facility in New Jersey, and they all, then after that marketing kind of kicked in and they all had their different label and whatever, but It's a large percentage. It's basically the same thing, just, isolated ascorbic acid from genetically modified corn, and that's it.
Oh my gosh. So again, when people are seeing these little vitamin C packets out there and these supplements and things like that, that's coming from genetically modified corn manufactured by Snooki at the factory in New Jersey.
It was, I don't know if it's all in New Jersey now, but I know at one point
back in the day,
Snooki
was like,
it was
she had that work.
Vast majority. Yeah. And again, there's many different benefits to whole foods. And you see that in the literature too, right? Fruits and vegetables and fish consistently show benefits. And then isolated nutrients, beta carotene, for example, vitamin E, they're not always the same. Fish oil, right? There's some value to fish oil, absolutely. But it's all over the place in terms of the literature. And I think it's because we don't yet understand what whole foods have to offer. Exactly. We can't quite recreate it yet.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's this intelligence there that is so far beyond where we are. We've learned a lot for sure, especially the last, decade-ish. Our awareness of what's actually in food has jumped up mightily. But there's still so much we have not identified. Like, people walk around as if we've got it all figured out. We know like 5% maybe about what's actually in food and how it all works. But even that little bit, what happens is food scientists are given the task of like, let's take what we know and basically try to manufacture and create this stuff on our own. Like, we'll use a gas chromatograph. Once we can identify certain flavors or smells in food, it's just chemicals. It's a chemical makeup, right? But it's not. It's not just. There's this unique intelligence there that animates that thing and makes it what it is. You're stealing basically a little bit of code and hacking the system and literally hacking our system, right? So we can take that chemical complex that, strawberry has this chemical makeup, and let's put that into, soda or candy. And, we know that it's not quite the same, but it's just enough to muddy the biological waters to where our biology is like, hey, I kind of know what this is, but not really, And so this is why real food is so important and so powerful. So that essential C complex, one of my favorite things, absolutely. But also, can you talk about the turmeric formula? Because you don't see that very often. It's mostly curcumin concentrates.
It is. And again, in our product line, we have this humility, and we believe nature knows best. And curcumin, very potent, powerful. You'll see the literature on it. It's robust, but it is often marketed as the compound in turmeric, but it's only one of them. And there's other compounds in turmeric, dozens of them, things like AR-turmerone, that have been shown to help with neurodegenerative issues. And then there's actually been studies where they take curcumin versus turmeric against certain cancer cell lines. This was at Anderson Cancer Center, I believe. And turmeric actually outperformed curcumin. And they've even done studies too where they take the curcumin out of the turmeric, and that was as powerful, if not more powerful, than isolated curcumin as well. And we already know, like I said, curcumin can go head to head against many modern drugs like Lipitor and Prozac and some of these aspirin anti-inflammatories. Absolutely. And so what we wanted to do was like, well, imagine the potential if we had all of those compounds together that make up turmeric, and then we added ginger, clove, and rosemary because there was a trial to suggest they're the most DNA protective spices, at least in that trial, and then add a little black pepper, and then imagine the possibility for people to be able to use that on a daily basis, even when they didn't want to take turmeric or eat turmeric every day. And we created our complex just with that in mind, that there's a lot more benefit when you have the whole entire complex and whole entire food.
So good, so good. So you mentioned that trial with looking at cancer, right? So turmeric is well noted to be an anti-angiogenesis food, right? So it basically can selectively cut off the blood supply to cancer cells, right? And again, like when you hear that stuff, like we don't really get it. This isn't taught in a conventional university setting right now. There are a couple of specklings here and there where it happens, like my guy, Dr. William Lee out of Harvard, he's done a great job of like integrating this into education, you know. But for the most part, this isn't getting talked about. He's actually the president of the Angiogenesis Foundation. Amazing. So he's like the guy knowing about angiogenesis, which is essentially all of our cells are getting a blood supply, right? Even cancer cells. But cancer cells just kind of doing what they want to do. They're getting their own blood supply. What if there were things that can intelligently cut away that supply so that the cancer cells starve? And so turmeric is one of those things. It's so remarkable. Yeah. Like, you know, so, but again, Paleo Valley, go to paleovalley.com/model, 15% off. They didn't have to do that. 15% off everything that they carry, that you carry. You're here. Yeah. You're here. So those are a couple of my favorite things as well. And so also, you know, my team here, we always have the bar. You saw it. You got to see what we have. That the bars, a real treat. Meat sticks. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the meat sticks?
Yes. So the meat sticks came out of, I was on a world tour. I had just reclaimed my health and trying to find really high quality food, or just the whole foods that I wanted to eat on the road was really hard. And so we decided, well, we're going to make a meat stick, because I historically underate protein, and we know now even grass-fed red meat has mental health benefits, and I was an athlete and a celebrity or a fitness trainer, so I was like, we just need to make a meat stick. But what was happening is I would eat the grass-fed meat sticks and they would give me a little tummy trouble. So I kind of dug into why this might be happening. And then I found an ingredient called encapsulated citric acid, and it just essentially was derived from GMOs and some hydrogenated oil, and it melts in. And so I just wanted to do it a little differently. And I thought if we fermented them like people did way back in the day, it would, you know, be a more healthful. We could avoid those additives, and it would have a different texture. I have some Polish friends who say it's like a kielbasa, and it's just a very different kind of meat stick. And so it's fermented. It's from American Regenerative Farms, and it's amazing quality. So you only have to add organic spices. There's no sugar, no MSG, no gluten, nothing else. And they come in 5 different flavors. So teriyaki, original, jalapeno, garlic summer sausage, and summer sausage. And turkey sticks.
Oh my gosh. I would think that to be able to create these versus the run-of-the-mill stuff, you know, the Slim Jims and things of the like, the reason that I'm even hesitant to talk about this is when I think about Slim Jims, I think about Macho Man Randy Savage. I don't know if you know about that, the commercials, slap it to a Slim Jim. But shout out to Macho Man. But anyways, we're not talking about that stuff, right? No. Which is, you know, if it's been marketed for, again, like if you look at what we're seeing at the checkout, right? It's that kind of stuff. It's the vitamin C packets. It's like a deranged version of what we would see historically, right? So to have the audacity, again, that's the word for you, is like to create a process where it's getting fermented, right? Like, how did you even pull that off? How did you find somebody that can help to put that together?
I'm very tenacious. Let's just say that. I came home, I called probably 200 different manufacturers in the country, and finally one said, yes, I'm willing to try. But it does take 4 times longer. It's not as lucrative. And using encapsulated citric acid is the industry standard. But they took a chance on us, and it worked. People appreciated the fact that we were able to avoid all those additives, and here we are. So it just took one, awesome. But also a lot of phone calls.
Well, I appreciate that as well. You know, again, like, I really do honor and respect what you're doing. Like, I know it has not been easy by a long shot. No. And I just appreciate it because it's so, you know, this is so much bigger than just us. And so I just really appreciate that, truly. And I hope that you are being able to, you know, enjoy this process as well as much as possible with all that's going on in the world. Yeah. So that's actually what I want to ask you about to close things out, because you're a mom, yes, you're a wife, you're a boss out here, you know, creating and helping to literally change the world and improve our planet, improve the soil, improve the environment. And, you know, you got a lot of stuff going on. So how do you do it? How do you manage having such a full plate? Yeah. Like what does your daily structure look like? Like, are you carving out time just for you? And like, can you take me through and help me understand how you're getting this stuff done?
Yeah, I think in our culture, as a company, it's the prioritization of work-life balance. And so, yes, I'm working very hard, but I'm not working myself into the ground. That would be against the entire point, right? To make myself a healthier human. So in the morning, I wake up and it's my favorite time ever with my little boy and my husband. And we do some red light therapy, or we get outside and we get some sun. And that's like our golden time. It's family time. And then I will go to work, probably around 6 hours a day. And then when that's done, we go home and we just have normal family time. And I just use my time wisely. I know my priorities, and I do prioritize myself when it's necessary, but I love the work so much that it doesn't always feel necessary. And I love the team we've built, and I feel grateful and lucky to be able to do something I'm passionate about and that could be potentially helping other people. So
yeah. And you just said a key word here is team.
Yes.
Because like I know that there can be a lot of long days and long nights through that process, but to be able to really find a flow and streamline things, it's going to be with and through other good people. One of them is sitting here with us, Shauna Mota, one of my favorite human beings.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't be connected if it wasn't for her. Oh. So, thank you, Shauna. I really love you.
Yeah, we do.
Thanks. And listen, so having that structure with your day, so family time in the morning, work day, decompress, all the good stuff. So is there any other, like what is a non-negotiable? Like what do you got to get in during the day just for you? Oof. Because you mentioned earlier something about ballerina,
yes.
dancing
every day, non-negotiable. It's not even something I have to force myself to do. If I don't do it, I'm just not myself. Mm-hmm. And so luckily we've just moved, and I have my dream of having a dance studio. We just got that about 2 months ago. And so I'm at least a half an hour every day. And I have these little goals, and I do my little fouettes or whatever, or sometimes I just dance party. But yeah, non-negotiable is dance, it's movement. And I used to feel guilty about it, but now I realize I'm teaching my son to prioritize himself. And what could be better than that?
You just said, again, this is so profound. You said the thing, like there was guilt associated with it. How crazy is that in our culture that, to take care of yourself, we have these emotions coming up of guilt, so you had to like work through that.
I have a long history of self-abandonment, and I think that a lot of people do because, again, our culture is like, go, just run yourself into the ground. But yeah, once I realized that I'm not going to be of good to my community, what if I'm not balanced myself? And I'm not going to give my child permission to take care of himself unless I model that for him. And so I think being a mom was the thing that pushed me over the edge and just said, you know what, it's may run counter to what you've done the rest of your life, but you have to change it now, if not for anyone else, but for Maverick.
Yeah. Shout out to Maverick.
Yeah.
And shout out to
my little
have
buddy.
You seen the new Top Gun, by the way?
Yes, we went. He is in love, and everyone was like, "Oh, is that why you named him Maverick?" And it's no, of course not. But the movie was exceptional. I mean, he got the little popcorn thing with his name on it, and did you love it?
Man, listen, I'm a Tom Cruise. Like, you gotta respect. Like,
Seriously?
literally, they're using real F-18s, and like it's so crazy. Just to like the real G's, the real like. There was, he had, was one of the Mission Impossibles where he jumped out of one of the tallest buildings in the world. Like he literally just went and jumped out of it, There's one of the Mission Impossible, he's like attached to a harness on the outside of a plane. Like he literally did that. The dedication, you got to respect that.
Oh, and he looks amazing. Yeah, I mean, right? Yeah. No, it was like an explosive hour and a half or 2 hours, but worth every minute. It was awesome.
Yeah. Man, well, this hour and a half has been incredibly worth it. And man, it's just such a special experience. And just to see what you're doing, I'm grateful that our worlds are intersecting. And, I'm a huge, huge fan, but also an ally, in this mission. And truly, like, I know when people are about that life. And, so just for everybody to understand, like, you really are. And so just really thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Shawn. I've been a fan. Everything you do is full of such integrity and just thought, and you're just such a leader and someone I've looked up to for a long time. So being able to be here today is kind of on my bucket list. So thanks for that.
Let's go. Full circle.
Yes.
It's all about full circles today. Everybody make sure to check out wildpastures.com/model. Again, 20% off lifetime. But again, there's only a certain amount of folks that can get access right now, but I'm sure you can get in right now if you act quickly. Again, wildpastures.com/model. Again, also $15 off your order right now. And also, of course, paleovalley.com/model. That's PALEOVALLEY.com/model. 15% off there as well. Vote with your dollar. Invest in your health. Invest in your family. Autumn, you're the best. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
What if I told you these are diseases of skeletal muscle first? And that obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease begin in skeletal muscle first. Insulin resistance begins in skeletal muscle first. And if we care about root cause medicine, then we have to care about skeletal muscle.